So today in my lecture, I'll be speaking on Sufis as friends and lovers of God. Sufism can be defined as Sharia-compliant ways to acquire knowledge about the truth relating to the loving God. Sufis or Muslim holy men style themselves as friends and lovers of God. Of the varieties of Sufi orders which emerged, four of them enjoyed considerable importance in India through the medieval centuries into the present. Two of these, Chishtis and Sohrawardis, flourished in Sultanate period, while the other two, Qadiri and Naqshbandi, became significant in the Mughal era. Several branches of these Sufi spiritual genealogies also made their presence felt in different regions and periods, which included Firdausis and Shattaris across what is now central India and Bihar, as also in Bengal. To start with, the living Sufi master referred to as Sheikh, Khaja, Peer, Murshid, guided followers or visitors at his dwelling place, hospice called Khanqa or Jamaat Khana. But later shrines, dargahs or darbars of Sufis of previous generations became important and grew into places of pilgrimage. Eventually, a whole sacred geography of Sufism called Vilayat was carved. It involved a lot of struggle and competition for control of territory, followers, and resources. The leading early figures of the Chishti Silsila included Moinuddin Chishti Ajmeri, Qutbuddin Bakhtiyar Kaki, Sheikh Fariduddin Ganja Shakar, who is venerated in the Sikh tradition as Baba Farid or Sheikh Farid, Nizamuddin Aulia in Delhi, and also Nasiruddin Chiragh Delhi of the middle of the 14th century. The comparable figure in the competing Sohrawardi order was Bahauddin Zakaria with his base in Punjab, Multan. Two formidable Naqshbandi personalities, Sheikh Ahmad Sarhindi, Mujaddid Al-Fasani, and Shah Waliullah, who have also left their mark in the history of Sufism in India in the 17th and 18th centuries. What distinguished Sufism from other forms of Islam was its belief that a human soul could achieve union with God, a belief later formulated in the doctrine of Wahdatul Wujud, unity of existence, or monism as a reality. By the 13th century, Iberian Sufi master Ibn Arabi, this doctrine often brought Sufis into conflict with Islamic orthodoxy, represented by Sunni, Hanafi ulama or theologians of the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal period. The latter, the ulama, believed that God was unique, and therefore to suggest that a human soul, Atma, could achieve union with God, Paramatma, was to imply that there was no distinction between God and human beings, whereas there has to be a distinction between the two. Indeed, the distinction between the concept of Wahdatul Wujud, unity of existence, and belief in Tawheed, oneness of God, needed assertion on the part of the ulama. The examples of Bayezid Bustami and Mansur Hallaj, the famous example of Mansur Hallaj, may be given here. Bustami's notion of fana, annihilation, may have been an Indian contribution to Sufism. Fana. Bustami was a disciple of Abu Ali Sindhi, possibly a Siddha from Sindh. Further, in Rushnama of Abdul Quddus Gangohi, late in the 15th, early 16th century, a Chishti Sabri Sufi of North India, Sufi state of Baqa is identical with Natha Jogi's concept of Shunya, attained by annihilating the body to achieve eternal bliss, a realm of blissful spiritual merger in divine grace and beauty. Mansur Hallaj, who was ostensibly killed for his scandalous remark, I am the truth, or Anal Haq, reportedly belonged to a Magi family of Iran and spent time with Buddhist monks in Turkestan. Also, Alauddin Simnani, who propounded the concept of Wahdatul Shuhud, which differed from Wahdatul Wujud, debated with Buddhists on the subjects of nirvana, organized Sufis as groups of preachers and hosted them in a big khanqah at Simnan, and khanqahs in turn resembled Buddhist monasteries. So there is a similarity as also appropriation between these traditions of Sufism and Buddhism in Central Asia, Quran, and in what is now Afghanistan before it comes to mainland Hindustan and further down. It is for these reasons that we find that even before Islam came to India, Sufis were persecuted for deviating from the straight path of Islam. Sufis were also targeted by the ulama for their occasional indifference to formal religious practices such as regular congregational prayers, namaz, or salat, instead focusing on meditations and spiritual exercises which included music. The legitimacy of the latter, that is listening to music in Mahfil Sama or Qawwali, was a major source of confrontation between the ulama and Sufis, especially reflected in the infamous inquest of Hazrat Nizamuddin Auliya at Sultan Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq's court in Delhi. The Chishti saint was thoroughly disgusted and forced to curse the Sultan and his men, Umra and ulama, nobles and theologians. In Sufi belief, all of them were quickly dispatched and vanished from the face of the earth. Further, Wahdatul Wujud and several forms or techniques of meditation brought Sufis very close to certain strands of non-Muslim religious traditions in the Indian subcontinent, such as Advaita Hinduism, which claimed that Atma, a human soul, and Paramatma, God, were one and the same, a theory similar to Wahdatul Wujud. Similarly, Sufis found much to learn from Hindu spiritual disciplines such as yoga, which influenced their techniques of meditation. Mention may be made here of pranayama, breath control, and the more spectacular Chillai Makus. Chillai Makus means inverted chilla, hanging oneself for 40 nights upside down with a branch of a tree overlooking a well inside a mosque complex in the darkness of the night. This is called Chillai Makus. Must have been taken from Urdhmukhi sadhus who do samadhi upside down, for 40 days. If Sufis learned from non-Muslim traditions, the local, Indian practices were also powerfully affected by Sufi beliefs and practices. In the teachings of Sant Kabir and Guru Nanak, for instance, one can see clear imprint of Sufi Islam. The criticism of idol worship and notions of egalitarianism and equality are all to be traced in Sufism. In the case of Sikhism, whole section of the Guru Granth Sahib comprise Sufi poetry as also compositions of bhakts and sants. However, for reasons political, unfortunately, there has also been difficulties in the relationship between Sikhism and Islam historically since the 17th century. The closeness to non-Muslim traditions helped Sufis play an important role in conversion and Islamization, even though they did not work with an explicit agenda of this sort. Sufis were not interested in converting people. Formal conversion of Islam was not needed to be followers of Sufis. And yet it happened. For some, conversion was indeed meaningless and thus not required, yet the presence of Sufis was the main factor in the conversion of large sections of the subcontinent's population to Islam. In Punjab, in Deccan, in Bengal, we know what is now East Bengal, Bangladesh. To start with, Sufi institutions, khanqahs, dargahs became centers where Muslims and non-Muslims gathered for worship and sought blessings and benediction from the Sufi saint sitting there. The slow and gradual process of Islamization started with devotion towards a particular Sufis, leading to the emergence of syncretic sects, symbolizing only half conversion to start with. Eventually, there emerged communities of Muslims who professed Islam formally, but continued with their practice of local customs and traditions, which were condemned by puritanical reformist Islam. Reformist Islam and movements have gained ground, particularly from 18th and 19th centuries onwards. And we are seeing the problems created by those reformist movements are unfolding in front of us. It is generally suggested that the relationship between Sufi orders and the political domain was distant, that the Chishtis were not interested in politics, or Awadis may be involved in politics, etc. But orders like the Chishtis certainly refused to accept money or support from the ruler. They believed that involvement in politics led to materialism and worldliness, which they wished to avoid. However, this attitude varied from order to order and between Sufis within a particular order also. In all cases, critical on-stage distance was a recommended way to deal with the political domain. That politics is separate from spirituality, and we are into spirituality, and involvement in politics is not good. Yet in general, the state needed legitimacy from Sufis, and the latter needed the protective umbrella of the state. Ritual Sufi chadars being sent to dargahs by people in power has a long history. Even now we know that Moinuddin Chishti's Mazar or Nizamuddin Dargah or Qutub Sahib in Delhi witnessed arrival of chadars from the ministries, from different governments and political leaders. So, as also compilations of Sufi poetry of love, especially a whole genre in Hindi called Premakhyan, of which Malik Muhammad Jayasi's Padmavat is one very, very interesting example. Interesting new scholarship of Niall Green, Scott Kugel, and Miko Vitamaki has explored hitherto neglected dimensions of Sufi practices. In conclusion, Sufis dedicated themselves to the love of God, which in turn meant love for all his creation and peace, for after all, they sought to preach what they practice. Love for God and respect and service to humanity. I conclude with a verse which Qutbuddin Bakhtiar Kaki in Delhi in the early 13th century kept listening in a mahfil-e-sama and get ecstatic, and then he would listen to the same verses before eventually, 3 or 4 days later, he passes away. And it is in Persian, but it is intelligible. It's called Kushtagane Khanjare Taslim Ra. Kushtagane Khanjare Taslim Ra. Har zaman az ghaib janiye digaras. Har zaman az ghaib janiye digaras. The victims of the dagger of submission get a new life from the unseen every moment. Thank you.